My wife and I were given a list of rules when our son was born. My wife and I wanted a child early into our marriage. We wanted a child we could call our own. We tried time and time again to no avail. My wife couldn't get pregnant. We watched as all our friends had children while we were stuck with nothing. My wife didn't want to adopt like many of your friends suggested. She wanted a child of her own blood and flesh. As time went on, my wife became more and more depressed. She wanted a child so bad and I felt guilty that I couldn't give her one. Eventually my wife finally gave in and we decided we were going to adopt a child. I tried cheering her up on the drive to the doctor checkup before we went to the adoption center. She didn't talk or even look at me. I could see out of the corner of my eyes that she was crying silently. When we got to the doctor's office, we checked in and grabbed the 2 available seats next to us. There was a man in the far corner of the room, and I could see he was staring at us. He had dark blonde hair with green eyes. He stared at me, and I got a weird feeling from him as I stared back. When we sat down, the man got up and I could see he was at least 6'5" with big arms and a good build. He walked over to me and my wife and said in a dark, deep voice, "Having some trouble, Mr. and Mrs. Roberts?" My wife looked up at him, then at me with a confused look on her face. "Sorry, do we know you?" my wife asked. The man chuckled, then said, holding out his hand, "No, but let me introduce myself. My name is Kyle Waller, but I'm known to many as Lazarus." We, not knowing what to do, shook the man's hand. I asked, "Now, is there something we can help you with?" The man looked at me and said, "It's not I that needs help, but you." My wife, already being in a bad mood, said, "Look, creep, just tell us what the hell you want and leave us alone." The man stared at her for a long time and I could see my wife starting to shake now. He said slowly, "I know the troubles you and your husband have had trying to have a baby. What if I told you that I can help you?" We were silent now. I thought to myself, how the hell does he know we can't have a child? I asked now after an awkward minute of silence. "Who the hell are you?" "I am a servant to a higher being." "No, it's not God. It's the one you know as Satan." I was about to speak, but the man shushed me and continued. "I know what you are thinking. I don't wish to hurt you, and neither does my master. We want to help you. We have seen the pain of this world and we wish to cure it. I have been watching you closely and have seen how much you both have been tortured. I simply wish to help uplift you of your torment, nothing more." I didn't know what to say. I sat there unable to process what I was hearing. I looked over at my wife, who was frozen in place, unable to even look at me as she had her eyes glued on the man. He spoke again. "I know this may be a lot to take in, but know that I only wish to help you in this world." He then took out a small bottle from his pocket. The substance inside it was purple and had a little sparkle if you looked closely. He then said to my wife, "I know how bad you want a child of your own. I have seen the restless nights you have experienced and the hours you have cried in your bathroom." He then held the bottle right in front of her face and said, "Drink this, and your wish will come true." My wife stared at the substance. I was shocked when she grabbed it out of his hand. I spoke quickly now to her. "Barbara, don't listen to this guy, he's crazy. That could be poison for all we know. We can have a child. Even if it isn't our flesh and blood, it still would be ours." She thought for a moment, staring at the bottle before the man said, "It's your choice whether you want your own child, or someone else's." I panicked as she opened the bottle up and in a swift motion drank the substance in one gulp. I stood up, terrified as I saw her collapse on the ground. "What the hell did you give her?" I screamed as I ran up to the man and grabbed him by his shirt. He smiled before saying, "She is fine. Give her a day's rest and let the potion do its work." I screamed and punched the man, who didn't flinch. I could feel the bones in my hand break as I punched him. I dropped to my knees crying out in pain. When I looked up, the man was gone. The nurses rushed over to my wife and me. I could hear them calling 911 on the phone. I ran to my wife, ignoring the pain in my hand. I put my head against her chest and could feel her heartbeat. I sighed in relief, then whispered in her ear, "You'll be okay, Barbara. Everything will be okay." After arriving at the hospital, the doctors took my wife and ran a scan on her. While doing so, they checked on my hand, which not surprisingly was broken. After being given a cast, they walked me over to where Barbara was being scanned. After the scan, the doctor came up to me and told me my wife was fine. "She has no brain damage or anything kind of damage," the doctor said. They put her in a room and suggested I go home and get some rest as well. I'm not leaving my wife, I said. I tried sleeping that night in her room but I couldn't at first. What the man said was still in my head. Let the potion do its work. I looked over at my wife who slept so peacefully, her breathing so calm and relaxed. I eventually somehow dozed off and when I woke up, I saw my wife wide awake looking out the window. Barbara, I said rushing over to her. She looked at me then smiled and said, I heard you broke your hand, are you okay? She said. I'm fine, how are you? I said. She smiled and kissed me when the doctor walked in and said, she's doing wonderful. We scanned her again and we saw in the scan that she's pregnant. I don't know how but she is. It's incredible, the doctor said in amazement. Congratulations. My wife hugged me and she started to cry. I was happy as well but I was more shocked than anything. It worked. The potion. But how? Then I looked at my wife and saw how happy she was. You're going to be a father now, be happy. The next few months were full of anticipation. Barbara was now full of life and happy again and I couldn't have been happier myself. I never gave the potion or that man any though during that time as we were preparing for our baby. We fixed the spare room upstairs into a nursery and bought toys and a crib for the room. During the last checkup at the doctor's we learned that we were going to have a boy. We painted nursery blue and fixed it up even more. We wanted it to be perfect for our son. As the days grew closer to the delivery, we started to get more and more excited. Finally, on a Saturday morning at 9:36 in the morning Barbara's water broke and we rushed her to the hospital. I waited right by her room for about an hour before a nurse came out and led me inside. Are you excited to see your son? She asked in a cheerful voice. Very excited, I said. After leading me inside the nurse walked out. No one else was in the room as I walked in to see Barbara holding our son in her arms. He was sleeping when I walked in and woke up when I walked in. He didn't cry though and I could see tears in Barbara's eyes as she was looking at him. Our own beautiful son, she said to me as I leaned in to look at him. Tears started to fill my eyes now as I said. He's perfect. Do you want to hold him? She asked. I would love to, I said. Barbara carefully put the baby into my arms as I stared into his eyes. He looked at me curiously with his dark brown eyes and puffy cheeks. He was small but not too small. As me and Barbara were looking at each other and our new son when we heard a voice in the corner of the room. Congratulations, I'm glad to see you both so happy. We turned quickly to see the man from before with his dark blonde hair and glistening green eyes. We stared at each other for a moment before the man walked over and looked down at our son. He's gorgeous, he's even got your eyes, he said looking at me. Yeah, thank you for helping us, I said to him. He looked surprised as I said this. Of course, I'm here to make this world a better place for people like you. You're probably wondering why I'm here and I'll get straight to the point, he said as he pulled out a crumpled letter out of his pocket. He handed the letter to Barbara and said, the child will be perfectly healthy and normal, as long as you follow these rules in the envelope. I knew it. I knew there would be some kind of a catch. Barbara opened the envelope slowly and took out the piece of paper inside. We read the rules silently in disbelief. Rule number 1. The child's name must be Lazarus and he must never be called anything else. Rule number 2. Do not look at the child when it's eating. Rule number 3. The child must not go to school or interact with kids. He won't play well with them. Rule number 4. The child must be in bed by 10 p.m. every night. No exceptions. Rule number 5. On the child's birthday, it must remain in its room no matter what. Rule number 6. If you hear screaming from the child's room ever, don't go inside. Rule number 7. If you see the child's eyes turn yellow, run out of the room immediately. Rule number 8. On the night the child turns 15 he must be chained up outside. If he isn't, may the Lord have mercy on your soul. Rule number 9. If the child somehow is not chained in rule number 8, you will have to kill it. We stared at the list in awe and terror. We then looked at our son. How can our son be this dangerous? Chained? Yellow eyes? What kind of madness did we get ourselves into? Barbara then looked up and said in a loud angry voice to the man. What the hell is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? The man said in a deep serious voice. This is no joke. Those rules must be followed no matter what. We looked down at the list as I said. Why? What did you do to our child? Did you curse him? I asked as we looked up and saw the man was gone. We were speechless. We looked at each other before Barbara took a hold of my hand and said, "Dave, I think we have to listen to these rules." "Why?" "This list is so bizarre it can't be real." I said. She was silent before she said, "Dave, we have a child in our hands that the doctors told us we would never have. How much more bizarre can this get?" She was right. I looked down at the rules again and sighed. "Okay, well, let's start with the first rule," I said. I looked down at my son and said, "Hello, Lazarus." The child looked up as soon as I said its name and opened its eyes fully wide and started to giggle. Barbara and I stared at Lazarus before Barbara said, "Well, how hard can these rules be?" Lazarus grew up to be a smart and intelligent kid. Barbara homeschooled him and taught him well. By the time he was 8, he was already doing fairly advanced math and other subjects. We followed the rules with our lives. Most of the rules were simple. We always called him Lazarus and we never looked at him when he ate. He was homeschooled and we didn't live near any kids his age, so we never had to worry about rule number 3 or rule number 4 either. We didn't like rule number 5 because Lazarus started to cry and get upset that he would have to stay in his room during his birthday. He surprisingly never argued about that rule, but we hated that we had to lock him on a day that should have been celebrated. The only rule that became a problem was number 6. When Lazarus turned 12, he screamed almost every night. He screamed so loud it felt the house was shaking. We had to buy earplugs just so we could sleep at night, but even those didn't help. He screamed for about a month or 2 before finally calming down. After that, life went back to normal. I never experienced rule number 7, but Barbara did. One day when she was home alone with him in the kitchen, she turned to see Lazarus staring at her with bright yellow eyes. Barbara said she ran out of the kitchen so fast, like her life was on the line. She had the feeling she was being chased, but she never heard footsteps behind her. When she waited a good minute or 2, she went back into the kitchen to see Lazarus reading a book. He looked up at her and she said her heart stopped for a moment before she saw his eyes were normal again. Lazarus was a normal kid overall and never showed weird signs of any kind. Once he turned 13 though, we noticed some things. They were small, but definitely visible. He got angry quicker and he seemed more aggressive with everything. He also started to growl in his sleep, a low but deep growl that woke me and Barbara up a lot. Rules 3 and 4 started to become harder now as Lazarus started to rebel against us. "Why can't I go to school and hang out with kids my age?" he would frequently in an angry tone. "Because you can't, son. You wouldn't get along with the kids," I would say. "That's bullshit, Dad. I just want some friends of my own. I want to be normal." I would never know what to say after that. I couldn't tell him about the list of rules because I knew he wouldn't listen to them. Rules were the last thing on his mind now. We started to become afraid as his 15th birthday started to roll around. I went to Home Depot and bought the strongest chain I could. When I brought it home, Barbara panicked, thinking it was too much for Lazarus to be chained up outside. "We already locked him up on his birthday, now we have to chain him up like a dog outside," Barbara said, yelling at me. "We have to follow these rules. If we don't, I'm afraid of what will happen to us and to him," I said in an anxious voice. She still wasn't happy. That whole week I would hear her crying in her sleep every night. I did feel bad for our son, but I knew and she knew what would happen if we didn't follow that rule. The night before Lazarus turned 15, he said to us as we were eating dinner, "Why don't we ever celebrate my birthday?" Barbara and I froze as we heard this. We knew this question would come up eventually and we tried to come up an answer, but we couldn't. Barbara spoke first. "Lazarus, just because we don't celebrate your birthday doesn't mean we don't love you." Lazarus then spoke in an angry tone. "You didn't answer my question. Why the hell don't we ever celebrate my birthday?" Barbara was silent now. I finally spoke up. "We just can't, son. We can't tell you why, and I know that may upset you and we're sorry, but we just can't celebrate your birthday." Lazarus was silent before he spoke in a much angrier tone. "You can't tell me why? That's your best excuse? Can you not tell me either why I'm locked in my damn room the whole day?" "No, Lazarus," Barbara said. "Screw you guys. I hate you," Lazarus said, slamming his hand on the table before running upstairs. Barbara broke down now, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away. "Our son hates us, Dave, because of those stupid rules. It's not fair or us or him," she said as she ran upstairs to try to talk to Lazarus. I was alone now at the table. Tears also started to form in my eyes. I knew there would be a cost. Anyone who works for Satan is evil. He doesn't want to help this world. He wants to make it worse. At 11 that night, I went into Lazarus's room. I picked up from his bed and brought him outside into the shed we had in our backyard. I tied the chain around him and wrapped it against the table in the shed. To be safe, I also locked the shed door when I was done. I went inside and looked at the time, which now read 11:37 p.m. I went into bed and drifted off to sleep. I woke up to screaming from outside. I turned to my side to see Barbara was not in bed. I panicked and ran downstairs out into the backyard. I saw Barbara on the ground crying in fear. I ran over to her as she said, "I'm sorry, Dave. I just couldn't leave him alone. I wanted him to know we care about him and that he's not alone," she said in tears. I turned to the shed, which was violently banging around. Then we heard the chain snap inside the shed. Oh no, only a matter of time until he breaks the lock. I helped Barbara to her feet as we ran inside before we heard the lock snap off right behind us. We ran upstairs and into our room. We could hear fast footsteps approaching. We looked around to see where we could hide and decided on our closet. We ran and hid inside just as we heard the door bust open. We could hear growling as we saw Lazarus through the gap in the closet door. That is not our son, I thought. What I saw was a creature that resembled a goblin with a small hunch on its back and glowing yellow eyes. It was crawling on all fours and growling like a wolf. Barbara was shaking in fear as I held her close to me. She was sobbing and I had to put my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. The creature that was our son was crawling around the room, looking under the bed and all around. Its eyes then went to the closet. Please don't come here, I thought. The creature slowly started to crawl towards the closet. I could see its glowing yellow eyes staring almost right at me. I looked around and thought fast. I grabbed a couple of blankets on the floor and flipped them over me and Barbara. We heard the closet creak open slowly. We held our breaths as the growls started to get closer to us. We could see the face of the creature as it pressed it against the blankets. It got closer and closer and we backed up as far as we could. Then by some miracle, the face backed off and we could hear it crawling away into the other room. We were silent and didn't dare move. We were paralyzed with fear. Somehow we managed to fall asleep in the closet with the blanket still over us. We woke up and didn't move until we saw the sunlight outside. We walked out of the closet slowly and started to look around the house for Lazarus. The house was a disaster. Glasses and cabinets were broken and almost all the windows were shattered. We called out for Lazarus, but got nothing in response. We searched all day for him until we eventually called the police and reported him missing. We were heartbroken. Our son was gone, and if he came back in the form he was in, we would have to kill him, our beloved son. That night as we were about to go to bed, we heard a knock at the door. Barbara ran downstairs before I could stop her. I ran down right behind her, and when she opened the door, she stood still like a statue. I ran over to the door and saw someone I prayed I would never see again. It was the man, the original Lazarus. He looked down at us and said in a deep, hardened voice, "I gave you a child, and all I asked for in return was for you to follow the rules I gave you." Neither of us could speak as we were still in shock. The man spoke again. "I'm not here to punish you. That is not my job. I'm here to warn you. You broke the most important rule. Now you have let out a monster into this world." Barbara yelled at the man, "Why did you give us that list? You ruined our son's life. I know my son and I know he is not a monster. He needs us now more than ever. Did you not read the rules?" he asked in a calm voice. "Of course we did," Barbara said. "You know what will happen then. That thing out there now is not your son. You know what you must do, and I hope you make the right decision." The man then turned and walked away slowly. Barbara slammed the door shut and started to cry again. "I can't, Dave. I can't kill our son," she said. "We have to, Barbara. We messed up and people will die if we don't kill him," I said. She looked down with tears in her eyes. Then she looked up at me and nodded slowly. "We knew he would come back. We just didn't know when." The next day I went to the gun shop nearby and bought a shotgun and ammo. I knew we were gonna need it. We stayed up that night and waited by the door. There was nothing. We waited for hours and hours. By that time Barbara was now fast asleep and I started to drift off as well. Before I did though, I heard a voice outside. "Mom. Dad." I jolted wide awake now. "He's here." Barbara woke up as soon as she heard the voice too and started to head towards the door. I stopped her before she opened it. "That is not him, Barbara. Don't listen to it." She looked at me, then at the door, as we heard another voice outside. Mom, I'm cold. I want to go inside. I miss you guys and I'm sorry that I yelled at you. It almost fooled me. I even started to reach for the door handle before reality kicked in and I stopped myself. Before I could even stop her, Barbara flung the door open. I pointed my shotgun expecting to see the monster I saw a couple days ago. I gasped as I saw Lazarus. He was completely normal looking now. Barbara ran and gave him a hug. I sensed something was wrong though. Lazarus didn't even flinch or acknowledge Barbara in the slightest. He only looked down at the ground. Then, I saw him look up at me and saw the glowing yellow eyes. Barbara, get away from him! I yelled, pointing the shotgun at the monster. Barbara didn't listen to me and continued hugging Lazarus and kissing him on the head. In a swift motion the creature grabbed Barbara and bit into her throat. I heard Barbara try to scream but she couldn't. Blood was squirting out of her throat as she crawled towards me. I'm sorry, she gasped before she stopped moving and lay motionless on the ground. I looked up to see the creature staring at me with its yellow eyes, then it smiled, seeing its razor-sharp teeth covered in blood. I fired a quick shot at it and ran towards the backyard. I ran into the shed where I could hear the creature crawling right behind me. I made it into the shed just in time as I heard a loud bang when I closed the door. I held the door as I heard the creature banging on it. I tried with all my might to keep the door closed, but I couldn't. I then spotted a spare lock I had in the shed and quickly locked the door with the lock. The creatures banged and banged. Slowly I saw the lock starting to break. No. It can't end like this. I started to cry now, knowing my fate was sealed. I then looked down at the shotgun and thought, if I'm going to die, I'm now going out without a fight. The creature gave another hard bang at the door before the lock gave out. I cocked the gun back and pointed it at the creature. It looked at me with its yellow eyes, glowing in the night. The last thing it said to me in a dark, raspy voice was, "Let's have some fun, Dad."